everyone, this is Virgil, Texas, with a special bonus episode. Today, we shall be talking about an issue that's very familiar to me, Cannon. Specifically, Dan Cannon, candidate for the United States Congress in Indiana's 9th District. Dan is a civil rights lawyer running to win a competitive primary on May 8th for the Democratic nomination to take on freshman congressman and wealthy fail son Trey Hollingsworth. Trey is an entrepreneur from Tennessee, by which I mean he founded companies with his multimillionaire father's fortune. That father, Joe Hollingsworth, also purchased this congressional seat for Trey, spending upwards of $1.5 million on a super PAC in the last election. Dan, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get to your biography, I want to talk a little about this district. Indiana's 9th is in the southeast part of the state, abutting Kentucky, containing suburbs of Louisville and Indianapolis. Largest city, I believe, is Bloomington. It is a racially homogenous district, some 91% white. Largely a Republican district based on past election results. In the last election, the 9th voted for Trump with 61% of the vote to Hillary's 34%, with Trump far outrunning Trey Hollingsworth, who only pulled 54% of the vote. Now, last time I interviewed a congressional candidate, Connie-Ella Ng, he was running to represent a district in Hawaii. I've never been to that district. It's a very blue district, but I am very, very familiar with it from those episodes of Full House where they go to Hawaii. It's hula girls and it's Spam and the Beach Boys, that sort of thing, fire dancing, right? So I have a perfect understanding of what Hawaiian voters' concerns are, which is volcano abolition, that sort of thing. I do not have any similar understanding of southern Indiana. I don't know what the economy is like, what the density is like, what sort of jobs people have, what opportunities there are or are not for people of my generation, what struggles are unique to that area. So Dan, my first question for you is, what does Indiana's 9th District mean to you?
I mean, it's a lot the same of what's going on in Hawaii. It's mostly volcano abolition, and it's we're trying to get Spam macadamia nuts there and available in abundant supply. No, it's despite the homogeneity of the district racially. I mean, I think it is a diverse district in terms of the way in which we have to, the way in which we choose our messaging, how we talk to people, what we present in different parts of the district. So it's 13 counties. From Louisville to Indianapolis, basically, and including IU Bloomington, like you said. And IU Bloomington is very progressive. The university, is you could probably say trending Democratic socialist at the moment. And then you've got the sort of blue dog Democrats in the South, and then the upper middle class types in the North, and then there's a whole lot of rural area in the middle. So it's a challenge. I mean, it's a messaging challenge. There's, everybody's concerned about healthcare, of course. Everybody's concerned about the opioid crisis because that affects everybody. And Scott County's in my district, and that's the county that was notoriously got national headlines for just having a now higher rate of HIV, where the rate of HIV has actually gone up in recent years. Just ravaged by opioids. Yeah. So I mean, that's something that is going on, and people are talking about all over the district. Other than that, you have pretty diverse things that people are talking. In the middle, jobs are a big deal. In the North, there's a lot of talk about infrastructure, and so it's a challenge. It's 2 hours in any direction. It's a lot of driving, and it's a lot of different kind of people, but a lot of good people. And I think that's as long as we can talk to those good people and convince them that we are looking out for them, I think we win it.
Is this the fabled Trump country that I've heard so many tales from in the New Yorker?
Yeah, it's we get questions all the time like, how do you appeal to rural voters, and how are you going to get to all these Republican voters? And I personally think that we're going to have a lot of previously non-voters and marginal voters that are going to come out for this, and we're of course we're still talking about how do we reach to the center, but I don't think that's a particularly productive conversation to be having right now. Yeah. We ought to be trying to get the people out that we couldn't get before.
Well, from my analysis, independents are moving in the Democratic direction very, very sharply. Suburban voters who in the past have been Republican loyalists are moving to the Democratic column. A lot of the white working class voters in the Rust Belt, post-industrial Midwest areas that flipped from Hillary to Trump are returning home, all of which points to a wave. The incumbent Hollingsworth won by 13%.
13, yeah.
I would project that to be the swing.
Yeah.
So it's right. I think this will be right on the cusp.
Well, we had a congressional candidate in 2016 that did 14 points better than Hillary too. So I think that those odds look pretty good. when you're considering that this guy was essentially riding the Trump coattails in 2016.
Is he not very popular generally?
Not particularly. I mean, he came in and bought out a Republican primary from established Indiana Republicans. So even the folks on his own team don't particularly like him that much.
Do those fractures still exist now?
Yeah.
You mentioned blue dog Democrats in the district. Are they successful down ballot?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that we're running into this cycle and trying to meet is to get people to fill those down ballot races. So you're dealing with a situation in my district where we haven't run Democrats for a lot of these seats in years and sometimes in decades. Just because they've been Republican stronghold seats. And so, that's been a big part of what we've tried to do in this campaign is I think we've got about 10 volunteers that have, morphed from being volunteers for the campaign into being candidates in different places in the district. And so, I think the sort of reverse coattail thing it will work in our favor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have the tailwinds on your side. I think any Democratic candidate can rely on these tailwinds. And after that, it's all hustle, talent, that kind of thing, messaging. We'll talk about campaign stuff in a little bit. Let's get to you. Dan, about you. You're a civil rights lawyer, yeah?
Yes, sir.
What are some highlights from your career?
Nothing too big. I came to be a civil rights lawyer in a sort of unconventional way, I guess. And I went into it like most lawyers do, just sort of not sure what to do with myself and wanting to do something helpful. And so hit the big career default button after college and went to law school. And thinking that I was going to go to work for a nonprofit or some sort of NGO, something like that, and ended up being a trial lawyer, working at a small plaintiffs firm and doing mostly employment discrimination, whistleblower type cases, race discrimination, sex discrimination, that kind of thing at first. And then that sort of has transitioned into inmates' rights cases and police brutality stuff over the years. So lots of what we call constitutional litigation. And as a result of doing that kind of work and sort of branding myself as a civil rights lawyer over the years, we got involved with doing the marriage cases and marriage equality cases that happened out of Kentucky and out of Indiana. And the one out of Kentucky actually went on to the United States Supreme Court, and the case now is Obergefell versus Hodges. That's how people know it, but resulted in marriage equality in all 50 states. So that was kind of a big deal. And we didn't get a chance to celebrate that much because a couple of weeks later, we, if your listeners know about Kim Davis in Eastern Kentucky,
they do.
Yeah, we filed that case. And, I teach at the law school, and I tell my first-year law students, when I was sitting where you guys are, I legitimately never expected to have the rock band Survivor issue a public statement on a case that I was working on ever in my legal career, but that's what happened in the Kim Davis case.
What was the statement?
Well, that we do not condone Kim Davis's use of the song "Eye of the Tiger."
Wait, how did she use it? I don't remember that. Did she go to court with a boombox?
She came out of jail with a boombox. So there was this big public rally when she came out of jail. And she got locked up for a couple of days, and then she comes out, and it's like Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz looking dejected on the stage, and it's like this big booming round of Eye of the Tiger. And then Survivor issued a public statement saying, no, we're not cool with that. And like the next day, I'm waking up, sort of like, did that really all just happen yesterday? Did the rock band Survivor issue a statement? So there's that, and that case is the case that won't die. It's still going on in the Court of Appeals. And then during the 2016 election, there was a guy, you may remember, a candidate who was holding lots of rallies nationwide that lots of racists attended. I guess that doesn't really narrow it down all that much, but anyway, there was a particularly raucous candidate that came to Louisville and invited a seething mob of white supremacists to beat up my black client who was there to peacefully protest him. And so they took him up on that invitation, and so we sued him before he became the leader of the free world, and the white supremacists that beat her up, and his campaign. And so that got a lot of attention on 24-hour news. And so,
How is that lawsuit going right now?
that is held up at the Court of Appeals. So we won the first round, which was basically them trying to say that Trump has got a First Amendment right to ask members of his audience to attack people that are there to protest. And the judge, a pretty conservative judge in Kentucky, said, no, actually, he doesn't have that right. That's not how the First Amendment works. And we quite agree with that. But that issue is being considered up at the Sixth Circuit right now.
It's a federal case.
Yep.
If you were elected to Congress, would you continue suing the president?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd have to withdraw from that case. I think I'd have to withdraw from everything. As I understand, people in Congress are technically very busy.
You are also involved, I'm told, in the medical marijuana lawsuit against the state of Kentucky.
Correct.
Can you discuss that?
Yeah, we filed a suit under a provision of the Kentucky Constitution to invalidate the prohibitions against medical marijuana. And so we've got some really cool clients for that. You know, people that have lived in a couple of other states and been patients, and then they move back to their home state and they're considered criminals, something that happens in Kentucky and Indiana. And, you know, we've got a Vietnam veteran that it takes medical marijuana for PTSD, and it's the only thing that helps him not have nightmares. We've got another guy who used to be a high school football coach that found himself, as so many people do, just all of a sudden one day addicted to opioids because it's the only thing he can get prescribed to manage his chronic pain. So, you know, it's, and I didn't really even know that much about medical marijuana before a couple of years ago when I started working on this case. And there's a big need for it out there. So we're
of course,
trying to get there by hook or by crook.
I gotta say, cool means something very different to trial lawyers than it does to most people. When you said I had some cool clients, I thought like weird old Jerry Garcia type hippies.
Well, I mean, yeah, not so much. It's not. There's been very little of the sort of Cheech and Chong type stereotypes that you associate with.
What is that provision in the Kentucky State Constitution?
It's Section 2 that is the provision against arbitrary government conduct.
Interesting. Now, how has your legal work contributed to the development of your political ideas?
Yeah, that's a hell of a question.
Okay.
I mean, I think that you know, what I've had to do throughout my legal career is take care of people. So I'm interested in policies that take care of people. You know, and in terms of how that gets to, you know, where I am now, I mean, I think that we're dealing with a landscape where, you know, you've got an executive that is appointing maniac judges to the federal court that, you know, which is where I practice, and they're going to be there for the rest of their lives.
Yep.
And it's like, we can get in and we can litigate these cases on behalf of individuals, and we can try to vindicate civil rights, you know, all we want to. But if we have judges that just don't care about the law and just don't care about people, that's not going to help us a whole lot. So, I mean, there's got to be a standard of accountability established through the other branches of government.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am a proponent of electoralism, and I recognize that's where a lot of the formal, actual power in society is. And when you have a president who's nominating just 27-year-olds with no legal experience, often have been banned from Dave & Buster's to the federal bench, that are then getting rubber stamped in, we're going to have to live with that for probably our entire lives.
Yeah. I mean, these are guys that are not qualified to preside over, you know, a meeting of a rock garden. So yeah, I mean, the idea that we would have to practice in front of them, and, you know, like something like marriage. I mean, something like the marriage case, or a marijuana case, or something like that, where, you know, that could have gone very, very differently. I mean, the marriage case itself could have gone very differently in front of, you know, one of these Trump appointee judges than it did in front of the Bush appointee that we had.
Yeah.
So
let's go into some issues. So regarding that medical marijuana lawsuit, you support the legalization of marijuana, but you also support it in order to treat the opioid crisis. Can you describe how the opioid addiction has impacted this district in Indiana.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And well, it's been devastating. And part of the connection there, I mean, if you look at the 29 states in D.C. that have some provision for medical marijuana, meaningful provisions for medical marijuana, I mean, you see overdose rates drop by as much as 20 to 25%
really?
In those states. Yeah, and it's, and a lot of it has, I mean, a lot of it's just kind of common sense. If you look at the way in which people get hooked on opioids to begin with, by and large, it's a lot from, these just, they're getting prescribed fistfuls of pills from doctors that don't have any other choice but to prescribe them opioid pills for managing chronic pain. And so, it doesn't take very long to get addicted to that stuff. And it's not terribly difficult to overdose on opioids once you're addicted.
And these pain pill formulations, they're more powerful today than they were in the past. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, there's sort of this law of diminishing returns here. It's, where I mean, it's just like my client that I told you about in Kentucky, where, he's taking pills and he's doing what the doctor tells him to do. And then 6 months later, you wake up and realize, oh, I'm addicted to opioids. I have a problem with this stuff. And the pill manufacturers know that. We need to pursue, greater liability and expanded liability for those manufacturers. But the medical marijuana piece it's not a cure-all, but it's a big part of it. It's something, to where somebody has an option for treating chronic pain that isn't just an opioid. So, I cringe every time I hear these guys call marijuana a gateway drug, because it's only a gateway drug because there's a black market, and otherwise it's an exit drug. You see people successfully get off of opioids if they have some other tool to manage chronic pain.
Yeah, I just came from the West Coast, and where all 3 states that we visited had legal marijuana stores, clean, nice, bougie stores that you can walk into and get treats and vapes and just weed right there, eat it on the street, And my colleague Matt said it's just so civilized.
You mean it wasn't chaos and anarchy and,
it was boring,
cats and dogs getting married to each other? Yeah, right.
It was dull. It was like going to a small pharmacy, honestly. The novelty wore off in like 5 seconds.
Well, that sounds pretty boring. Maybe I should abandon that platform.
But most people have come around to that view, even a lot of people in the Republican Party.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, that's a great example, though, of something that has huge bipartisan support among people on the ground. And, elected officials of both parties still see it as being this sort of taboo thing. When I first started running, we were out and proud about marijuana support from the very beginning. And it caused me to lose some support among some old guard Democrats in Indiana because they're like, oh, you're running on marijuana, you can't be a serious candidate.
Yeah, well, support for legalization is something like 60% nationwide, but we don't have a legislature that votes 60% for the legalization of marijuana.
Yeah, and medical is a no-brainer. You're talking 80 or 90% on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bernie Sanders is going to file a bill that imposes stiff criminal penalties for these drug executives. I don't want to quote from an article here, and this was a fact that was just genuinely amazing to me. McKesson, this is from Stat News. McKesson, a drug distributor, is said to have shipped 5 million opioid pills to a West Virginia town with 400 residents over a 2-year span. Now, I have not followed the opioid issue as closely as many people have, so that is staggering to me.
Oh, yeah.
And it's staggering, and I'm becoming more and more aware of the malfeasance on the part of these pharmaceutical companies, and as well, it strikes me as more profoundly evil than anything big tobacco has done. If not as.
Well, that's a pretty high bar, and I'm pretty mad at big tobacco. But the point is well taken, and I mean that's part of the problem. And there is no national system for monitoring this stuff either, really. So what we see in Indiana is somebody can easily just drive down to Florida and get a couple of prescriptions and come right back up, and I mean nobody knows that they're getting this stuff legitimately.
Here's a little about the bill. The legislation would impose a 10-year minimum prison sentence and fines equal to an executive's compensation package if the individual's company is found to have illegally contributed to the opioid crisis. It would also impose an additional fine on those companies of $7.8 billion, 1/10 the annual cost of the crisis per a 2016 estimate. Is that a bill you would support?
Absolutely.
So the scuttlebutt is that the last big legislative push before this Congress is turned over to the Democrats this year is going to be about opioids. And the Republican plan, as near as I can tell, is just an increase on the war on drugs. Now, when you talk to people in your district about the opioid crisis, a district that probably falls, conventionally to the right of center somewhere, do people clamor for more criminalization, or what do people want?
I mean, for the most part, no. I think people realize, by and large, again, it's another example of the disconnect between elected officials and what's actually going on in Peoria, right? So, I think people, by and large, realize that the war on drugs has been a massive failure. And, there's not anybody out there that hasn't been affected in some way, shape, or form. A friend, a family member, everybody knows somebody that's fallen victim to this. And one thing that we've been talking about a lot on the campaign trail is how do we sort of rise to the cultural challenge of picking this thing up out of the criminal justice box altogether and moving it over to the public health box where it belongs. When you say that in no uncertain terms to people, they get it. I think for the most part they get it. And we are slowly coming around to the idea that this is not, simply a moral failing thing. This is not simply something that we can, treat through the criminal justice system, that we actually need to have real public health solutions for it. And it's easier for people to process that, unfortunately, because they've seen so much of it in their own lives and their own families. And if you have to tend to a relative that's had an overdose, or if you have, your brother or sister or son or daughter that's gone to jail for the 50th time and that's the only kind of treatment that they can get, and you see that not work over and over and over and over again, people sort of get the idea that we need new solutions.
Right. You begin to understand what's really wrong with the criminal justice system and using that to solve every social ill.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how do you talk to people about a broader vision of social services, of healthcare? I mean, how do you feel about that?
About healthcare specifically?
Well, about healthcare generally. I mean, you're talking about turning the opioid addiction from an issue of the justice system, of criminality, to an issue of public health. Mm-hmm. And that necessarily means a discussion of the health infrastructure in the country, and specifically in your district.
Sure. I mean, I think that the way we've approached it with just about everybody is to say that, Americans deserve a healthcare system in which nobody has to go bankrupt or die because they can't pay a medical bill. And then from there, we can start to talk about what that might look like. But I think it's also useful for us to ask the question of who doesn't deserve healthcare. Is it the poor? Is it, is it seniors? Is it, people who can't work? I mean, who doesn't deserve health care? Is that something that's just a luxury good that should be provided to a privileged few,
Yep.
or is it really something that everybody on some level is entitled to? And then we can work from there. I mean, I think almost nobody would say that just because you can't afford to pay a medical bill, you should go bankrupt, you should lose your entire life savings, you should lose everything that you ever worked for, or you should die because, you're too scared to go to the doctor. Most people, not everybody, but most people would say that we need a system that's better than that. And I think that once we come to that agreement, we can build on that. Obviously, we've talked a lot about. We're still in the sort of primary honeymoon phase, right? So we're talking a lot about single payer healthcare, and that is free at the point of service, that's comprehensive, and all that good stuff. And I think that's the idea that we need to normalize and start shooting for.
I think that's a persuasive way to frame the issue. Is it now on May 8th? That's your primary. Is that a closed primary?
It's an open primary in Indiana.
Okay, any party?
Any party.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you can pull a ballot for the Democrats. You can pull a ballot for the Republicans. So, got to pick one. But
right. Let's shift gears for a minute and talk about ICE and the immigration issue right now. You, I'm told, have been involved in litigation involving immigrants and refugees. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Could you talk about that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I have represented immigrants and refugees in some capacity for my entire legal career. So a lot in employment cases, because it's very easy for employers to take advantage of immigrants and refugees if they want to. But, more recently in sort of immigration type situations. And, what we've seen is, what I've seen anyway on the ground in Indiana and Kentucky is increased enforcement against, peaceful people who are not otherwise committing any crime and who are not engaged in any sort of nefarious, what we think of as nefarious conduct. We're seeing ICE come in and scoop them up out of the parking lots of their apartment buildings or where they work or whatever because they don't have the right pieces of paper to be in the country. And there is no way for a lot of these folks to get here, quote unquote, the right way. I can tell horror story after horror story. There was a guy that I represented that was from a Central American country, and his village had been essentially overrun by a drug cartel. They chased him out of his house, chased him and his family out of his house, and so they all came to the United States. And he had arrived separately from his wife. His wife had successfully applied for asylum. And he had not figured out how to go through that process. They had been here for a couple of years, and I think it was in January. It was right after the elections. He got scooped up by ICE, taken away from his family, and he was the sole source of support for that family. Taken away from his family and dumped 90 miles away in a jail in Boone County, Kentucky. And, we treat people that are here without the right pieces of paper, that are just trying to feed their families. We treat them worse than the worst criminals that we have that are U.S. citizens. And so, under no set of circumstances would you ever take somebody and take them, 100 miles away from their family, give them 15 minutes of visitation a week or whatever it was, and then just randomly move them to different places in the United States where they're even farther away from their families. But that's exactly what happens to undocumented immigrants in this country when they get apprehended by ICE. And so this guy gets moved from Boone County, Kentucky, where he's locked up in general population with everybody else that's accused of everything else, moved up to Kenosha, Wisconsin, to a jail up there without telling his lawyer, without telling anybody that it happens. Just steal him away in the middle of the night. And then I think he ended up in a staging facility in Louisiana. I mean, this is somebody who signed a voluntary deportation order. It says, yeah, okay, go ahead, you got me, send me back. And he's still spending months in several different jails, not getting medical attention, not having anybody that can speak his language, not having access to a lawyer. If he didn't have a volunteer lawyer that was doing it, and most of them don't, and eventually gets sent back to, his village, which is still overrun by a drug cartel. And it's a fantastically despicable system that we have. And I think most people don't have much experience with it because, especially in the middle of the country, our communities tend to be very segregated. There's a big Latinx population there in southern Indiana, but there's not much of an overlap in the Venn diagram between the Latinx people and the white folks. And so we don't know about ICE. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know about these sort of Gestapo style tactics that are going on. And, I've got a unique position in this campaign that I can talk about that and we can tell people about it. We can educate people about it. And I think by and large, if decent people knew what was going on in their own backyards, they'd be outraged about it. Rightly so.
So if you follow the DREAM Act debate and the shutdown brinksmanship, it seems like for congressional Democrats, their beginning negotiating position is we want permanent residency, not citizenship even, permanent residency for the good immigrants, for the ones who came here as children through no fault of their own, which again is implying that it is an egregious thing to want to come to this
fault
country.
In the first place, yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And who go to college and who are just nice, clean people who will never get arrested even for an arbitrary reason. And they lost that. I believe it's only through court orders that Dreamers are somewhat safe right now. What's your position about undocumented people in this country?
I think that we need a clear path to citizenship. And that's another example. You can come up with countless examples, I think, and that's something that I've learned throughout the course of this campaign, where there's just a huge disconnect between people that are in positions of power and real people on the ground, right? I mean, I think the bipartisan support for a Clean Dream Act is huge, and there's an ample bipartisan support for a path to citizenship. Most people, in fact, already think that it exists. That there is some way for somebody once they're in the country to go about pursuing citizenship the quote unquote right way. When in fact there just isn't a way to do that. I mean, most of the people I talk to in Indiana think that there is. And so I think that we've got an obligation to start talking about that, to start talking about the sort of inherent weaknesses in our immigration system, but more importantly, to take the moral high ground on what we are doing to people who are here and they are peaceful and they are simply seeking a better life for their families.
It strikes me that the people who would disagree with that position, the people I see them online who cheer, people being, dragged away from their families and thrown out of the country, are people who would never vote Democrat, to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah.
So why bother compromising with that brutal and nihilistic point of view?
No, I mean, and to the contrary, we should be going on the offense on it.
Absolutely.
We know that they're going to hit us with, they're already hitting Joe Donnelly in Indiana with these ridiculous MS-13 ads. And there's all this immigration fear-mongering. And we've got to take control of that message. We've got to take control of that message and say, look, there's right and there's wrong, and we need to play the Good Samaritan here for people that are here. If they've simply got the wrong pieces of paper to be here, let's help them get the right pieces of paper. If they just want a better life for their families, then that's what we ought to be able to offer here in America.
Mm-hmm. And that fear-mongering, obviously didn't work last year in the Virginia gubernatorial election.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, so I think that by saying these things, by taking a solid moral position on something that is, in my view, as much of a no-brainer as cutting the legs off of ICE, and not having a secret police force that's just a brute squad to carry out a mission of ethnic cleansing. I mean, taking the moral high ground on that is going to bring out new voters. I see it, and we've already registered 17,000 people to vote. Wow. Just through my campaign alone.
How long? What period?
Since last August. And that's, if those people show up at the polls, it's going to be because they were excited about something. It's not just because they want to vote against the incumbent or they're scared by the incumbent. They're scared about what the Republicans are doing. So there's a lot that's going to drive a lot of people to the polls too. But we have to provide a positive agenda that is based on, the idea that we stand for something, that we stand for human rights, that we stand for human values, that we actually are going to do the right thing when we are in office.
17,000 is quite an impressive figure. If I recall correctly, the difference between the Republican and Democrat in 2014, the last midterm year was 50,000, something like that.
Yeah,
in a big Republican wave.
Yeah, well, we in Indiana we had a miserable 2014. We were number 50 out of 50 in voter turnout, and I think that obviously that's bad, but it suggests to me that we can do a lot better. There are a lot of people out there that are just not motivated to vote, and we have to figure out why and get them motivated.
So it strikes me, and I assume it strikes you too, that ICE is totally unaccountable at this point. And what do you propose we do with ICE?
Get rid of it. Why do we need to why do we need to spend billions of dollars on this sort of brute squad that is there to remove people? We have law enforcement that takes care of the violent criminals. We have law enforcement already that takes care of gangs. We have a border patrol. Do we really need to spend $8 billion plus of public money on a secret police force that is accountable to no one? That deports American citizens, something like 4,000 American citizens and green card holders by accident every year because they don't have access to counsel, that kicks in doors, that terrorizes people, that breaks up families. Do we really need to spend all this public money on that? Can't we do something better with it?
What replaces ICE in your mind to handle matters of visas, immigration, things of that nature?
Well, we've already got a system in place to handle issues of visas and immigration and all that stuff. ICE has only been around since 2003, and the Border Patrol was very effective at keeping people out of the United States before that period of time. The FBI was very good at breaking up gangs. There are. These functions are already in place. They've been in place for decades. So the idea that ICE is some kind of sacred cow. They're really, their only function is to bust up families and take peaceful, nonviolent people out. We've got for the violent offenders, we've got an ample law enforcement answer to that.
Yeah, and I'm sure most people could not tell you what ICE is or does one way or the other.
No, I think that's part of the problem. Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. Absolutely. So we need to educate them about that.
That's interesting that you talk about enforcement being effective in 2003 because that's before the Republican Party and Republican voters really started clamoring against all evidence for stricter border enforcement. They started asking for a wall in the 2000s when Bush and McCain tried to pass this, comprehensive immigration bill. They started demanding more money for Border Patrol, more agents. They started using these, racist propaganda nonsense about MS-13 gangs and that kind of shit to just scare people. And the time and time again throughout this, the Democrats have been willing to concede so much ground to that position that is already faulty and motivated by bad actors and say, okay, yeah, sure, no, we want to secure the border too. We want it, which in practice just means throwing more money to Border Patrol, enforcing stricter, more arbitrary, and more undignified measures at our ports of entry, more humiliating measures, because that's easy for them to give that away because there's not a strong anti-border, position reaction in this country. And it's all led to this point where the Republican Party is now 100% for the crazies, for the racists, for the, we demand a wall now. That's their big thing. So what should the left counterbalance position be? What would an honest Democrat position, what should the Democrats stake out?
Yeah, and so I think that needs to be an ongoing conversation, but it kind of goes back to what I was talking about on we've got to find places where we can play offense and not just constantly be on the defensive. And so, they raised this thing of, all right, there's an army of brown people coming over the border and they're going to kill us all and prove us wrong about that. I think, the counter messaging in a very crude sort of way should be like, these are people who are escaping desperation and poverty and war and all kinds of horrible things that we can't even imagine. Why should we not help them? Give us a good reason why we shouldn't help. Why here in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, why shouldn't we help them? I think that at its core, our message should be something like that. And I think we've got an opportunity to put them on the defensive with moral messaging about immigration. How we do that is, I think, has got to be an ongoing conversation. Abolishing ICE is the sort of easy, low-hanging fruit, in my view, where you don't need a Gestapo to go out and round up people to carry out this mission of ethnic cleansing. And if you're saying that's not what it is and that's not what they're doing, then prove us wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now, Congress recently passed SESTA FOSTA with widespread bipartisan support, a bill that purports to fight sex trafficking. What it actually does is erode the Section 230 protection for internet content providers such as Facebook or Twitter or Google, which immunizes them from legal liability for what users do on their platforms. Now, although the law does not go into effect until next year, the fallout has been immediate. Craigslist has eliminated their personal section. Reddit, a website with subforums literally devoted to selling opioids, has eliminated subreddits catering to sex workers. Sex workers and others have also reported their personal content being deleted from Google Drive. Opposition to SESTA FOSTA has mostly come from digital libertarians, groups like the EFF, the ACLU, Senators Rand Paul and Ron Wyden, the only two to vote against it. Wyden, who of course co-authored the Section 230 language in the 90s. But opposition is also being led by sex workers themselves, whose work will inevitably be made more dangerous. For instance, they'll be unable to vet clients, warn each other about violent clients, if they are essentially exiled from the internet services that we all use. So where do you stand on SESTA FOSTA? And as a follow-up, where do you stand on the legalization of sex work?
Yeah, wow. Okay, so that is I'm glad that you asked that question. I've never been asked that question before, I don't think, and it's something that hasn't come up on the campaign trail. But it's something that I'm aware of and I've been watching. And, what I see, I think that the way in which you phrased your question sort of presupposes the answer, right? We have to listen to sex workers on this, and we have to listen to people who are going to be put directly in danger as a result of this act. And as far as I can tell from people that are actually involved in that industry, and the industry's not going away. That's the important thing about this too, is right. The industry is not going to go away. Obviously, just because you try to legislate it away, no matter how you try to do it. That is an industry that's going to be there. So, shoving it further and further and further underground is not the answer. I think you see that from by and large as a response from the people that work in that industry, and we should take their lead on it. So, this is one of the rare occasions in which I would side with Rand Paul. Not unheard of, but rare. And I would have voted against it. Yeah.
I want to shift gears and talk more about your campaign, your, general political thought, and what a Congressman Dan Cannon might look like. Are you a member of the DSA?
No. Not a card-carrying member. I wear their button on my jacket, though. I've got a cool button that Louisville DSA gave me, so
that's confusing.
Like that.
Yeah. That's stealing valor,
No, yeah. Listen, I think that they would be proud to know that I wore their button in Manhattan. But no, we're endorsed by two separate DSA organizations, and I'm proud of that. And I think it's it's something that we can't run away from, right? So I'm not ashamed of the label. I think that DSA is doing great work. And I think that we should be expanding the tent of the Democratic Party into DSA members and DSA philosophy.
Do you oppose capitalism or are otherwise critical of it?
I am critical of it in the sense that, where we've gotten to in the United States, this sort of cutthroat capitalism, this hyper-capitalism where capital is valued over all other things. Capital is valued over labor. Capital is valued over our children. Capital is valued over our health and safety and well-being and everything else. So in that sense, if that is the way we define capitalism, and I would argue that by and large it is, in the United States, I'd say that I'm an anti-capitalist in that sense.
Well, what do you believe to be, I guess this is two questions here. What do you believe to be the answer to that in terms of, I don't know, anything that would just not make us all give up?
Yeah, look, I'm not a theorist, and I'm one of the few. Sure. I'm one of the few lawyers.
I'm glad. I would not want any theorists to run for office. I've met theorists. Yeah.
I'm one of the few lawyers too that didn't graduate with a political science degree. So, to me, I think that we've got the opportunity in this country to have a government that gives people the tools and opportunities that they need to be able to live their best lives. Simple as that. And that's what we ought to be striving for. And so, I don't really care whether you call it social democracy or socialism or some other kind of ism. I think if it works, if it's a good policy that demonstrates, common care for people and basic core human values, I'm for it.
If capital has all the power and they can spend billions of dollars on the Republican Party and yes, many people in the Democratic Party, what chance do people have? Does a largely discouraged non-capitalist class have to combat that in the absence of, mass movements, real politics, even a political party that is a party for the working class?
Yeah, in the absence of those things, not much. That's why we got to strive to create those things. So, I guess the answer is we'll see. But we know that we're not going to outspend them. We cannot fight on that battlefield. Like, we know that.
You can't outspend Hollingworth's father.
We're not going to be able to do that. He's a guy that's a multimillionaire that comes from multi-generational wealth. So we have to pursue other strategies. And I think those strategies have got to be at their foundation. They've got to be humanizing. And they've got to be, oriented to basic human rights and human values, and we've got to, and by that, I mean, we need to be knocking a lot of doors, which we are in this campaign. We need to be having a lot of face-to-face contact. We can't afford to fight these battles in the air exclusively, and we won't win. We know we don't win if we do that. So it's got to be, whatever movement building we're doing through our campaigns has got to occur primarily on the ground, where we're having face-to-face, real human contact and showing people that we're not the scary monsters under their bed, because that's the propaganda that they are receiving.
How big is your campaign?
How big is it in terms of, I have like 7 staffers and 1,000+ volunteers.
Wow.
The biggest internship in the history of Indiana University Bloomington, which we sort of stumbled into. It's up around, I believe, 300 interns at this point.
300?
Yeah, it's getting close to that. So, I mean, it's big, and people respond to big ideas. I mean, go figure, right? And it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. I think that people want a positive agenda for the future of America. People want to talk about big ideas. People want to talk about revolutionary ideas. And I mean, people are inspired by it. People want to be inspired by something. They don't want to just show up to vote against the other guy. Because they like him less than the candidate that they voted for, right? So, I mean, I think that's where we've ultimately got to go.
Especially young people who are inheriting a very raw deal right now.
Mm-hmm.
So how does your campaign contribute to that general struggle beyond just we're going to elect one person to Congress?
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that we've said from the very beginning, is that we don't run on the idea of a person getting into office. We run on ideas themselves, right? And say that these are the ideas that we have for the future of America. These ideas belong to everybody. We are backing them not because they're politically expedient, but because they are good ideas. And it has to be, it goes back to what I'm saying. It has to be more about the ideas than it does about the personality of anybody involved. You still have to be able to get out and be personable and talk to people and have, the sort of you have the willingness to forge human relationships with voters and prospective voters, and especially non-voters who wouldn't otherwise be inclined to come out and vote for anybody. But I think you have to run in 2018. We need to be running idea-driven campaigns.
Let's say you're elected to Congress. For starters, what would your constituent service look like?
That is something that we have emphasized since day one, and I think it should be job one. A robust constituent services program is really important if we want to turn these swing districts into non-swing districts. And so, every time I get a reporter that asks me, how are you going to win this super Republican district? Isn't this district very red? Well, a Democrat held this district. I mean, Lee Hamilton held this district for 34 years, and then it's gone back and forth since then. But Hamilton had a very good constituent services program. When you talk to successful congresspeople that have turned their districts and have been, and now are virtually undefeatable in their districts on both sides of the aisle. It's often because they've got good constituent services, and it's really important for where we are, I think, right now politically, when people do sense that there's such a huge disconnect between the people that make the rules and the people who have to follow them. And we're in a situation in a democracy where people feel so cut off from the institutions that govern their daily lives, so cut off from the rulemaking process, so cut off from any sort of semblance of control, that it creates a problem, and it creates, voter apathy, and it creates anger, and it creates all this other stuff that you see as a result. And you can see very clearly in America now. And so a responsive constituent services program is job one for me. And it's something that is, like we've done it in this campaign where we've been doing naloxone, Narcan trainings, and blood drives, and homeless, clothing drives for the homeless, and all this other stuff out of our campaign offices. You don't see congresspeople typically using their campaign offices like that. And my question to those congresspeople is, why not? You've got a golden opportunity to connect people with resources in their community, to provide people with resources that they wouldn't otherwise have, and to just be there as a sounding board. So like, If you need to get grandma's Social Security hearing moved up by a couple of months, then call your congressperson. If you need help with that passport or a visa, call your congressperson. If you need to get your cat out of the tree, call your congressperson. We'll come and get your cat out of the tree, right? I mean, that's the kind of constituent services program that everybody should be trying to build on the ground, so we have a real future on the left in the Midwest in particular.
Do you think that constituent service is an opportunity to help people organize, for instance, to show solidarity with a union drive locally, perhaps grad students at that university?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really just now getting to the tip of the iceberg of exploring what those possibilities might look like. I'm excited for my first couple of years in office to really get more into that and see what a good constituent services program can do, because I don't think that by and large they have been used to their full potential, and I think that there's a whole lot that we can do. Of course our votes matter and the stuff that we do in DC matters, but I think for the long-term future of the left in the United States, what we do on the ground in our own communities matters a whole lot more.
Do you have any closing remarks?
No, but thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks for coming on. Dan Cannon, candidate for United States Congress, Indiana's 9th District. Primary is May 8th. You can find him online at dancannon.com.
It is canon4indiana.com, CANON, like the camera, not the artillery weapon, FOR, Indiana.com, or your favorite social media outlets, usually at Canon4Indiana.
Same 4, FOR.
Yeah, FOR.
Not the number 4.
Not the number 4, either spelled out or numerically. Yeah.
Okay. Until next time, bye.
Rising up.